So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have a map that hasn't been seen on this channel at the very least for quite some time. I think this one is called the Old Forest Road, if I'm not mistaken. The other one that's a road that goes through a forest without a settlement I think is called Erin Lasgalen. I think that's the way around it is. I think this one is just called the Old Forest Road, which is quite interesting, given the fact that the main feature on the settlement is not really its road, but its town. So yeah, it's going to be a siege battle, excuse me. And it's going to have the forces of good on the defence, as perhaps is the usual. And it's going to be a combination of men in Gondor, elves in Mirkwood, and dwarves, who are Erebor, although they are a little bit further down the road in the trees, who are going to be defending against an assault from the front, which is quite interesting, because most of the time when I've seen this settlement before, I must say, a lot of the attacks have been coming from this direction, from the forest and the roads itself. But today we're going to be seeing the vast majority of it come from the front, which the main feature of this map on this occasion will be the gorge that runs through the middle of the map. There are bridges which allow you to transit from one side to the other. Bridges can be a little bit awkward to use, of course, but it's mainly going to have to be the attackers that have to contend with that, I think. I think the defenders are going to be content to sit back and allow them to gain map control over here, because they don't really gain an awful lot by going forwards and trying to take this encampment, which has almost certainly been set up by the besieging forces today. Will be quite interesting to see how they go about matters. We'll go through the intricacies of what's actually going on in the settlement itself in a little bit when we go through the defenders, because that, I think, is going to be a big factor in this battle. But for now, we shall have a look at the attacking army, starting off with Czech Norris, who is playing as Rhun. Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen here on the front line, which of course, if they can get firing into, if they get a clear shot into a choke point, it's real bad news. Really only the Blacklock engineers can match the kind of devastation that the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen can cause, purely because of the armour piercing that they add to their repertoire, as well as the body piercing, of course, albeit their ammunition supply is significantly lower than that of normal rangers, so overall they will actually get less kills, but they'll get it far more efficiently against more heavily armoured and shielded units. A good choice to bring the Variac Mercenaries as well. They will do quite nicely in a skirmish fight, which it's a 3v4, so it's not quite as harsh on the defenders as it would be in a 3v5, but with the numbers advantage you can still wear them down over a long period, or over a longer skirmish fight with an archer like this. They're not especially, they don't have a lot of punch to be sure, but they do enough damage. They're not trash when it comes to the damage they deal, and they're reasonably solid as well because of those shields. A good combination. Over here, Cummel's chosen, which I've said, you know, they look very impressive. Among bodyguard units, they're fairly average for, you know, what they are. But, you know, they are still a bodyguard unit, so they will outperform the vast majority of infantry 1-to-1. We've got some Eastron warriors, again, being brought. So every time we've seen Rhun recently, actually, the Eastron warriors have had a higher probability of actually showing up, which is kind of neat. They are better than the clansmen in melee at the base level, but the clansmen tend to be a very efficient unit, of course, because they pack on that armour very often. Eastron crossbows as well, so just some basic crossbows. They can be skirmished down more easily than quite a few, but if you can get them into position again, they're still going to be able to do that nice damage that the crossbows are known for. There's some Scion Rim in there as well to add some solidity to the Eastron units. We've also got some Cav, the Cummel's Dragon Knights. It's possible Cav could make an appearance today, maybe, you know, even Erebor, of course. We've got cavalry in Reforged, but it is perhaps a little bit risky when you consider the costs that would be involved in Erebor, Mirkwood and Gondor bringing cavalry, when you consider what it would take away from their infantry. But we shall see. And the Dragon Knights, of course, are a very, very effective unit of knights. Only, I think, the Knights of Annúminas have got all-round higher defensive stats than the Dragon Knights, and that's armour, shield, the whole lot, because of course melee defense is a little bit different. Balcoth Tribesmen, obviously a little bit of armour piercing damage with their javelins. Flag Rim, unsurprising to see them, because the armour piercing will be very useful against the dwarves and Gondor in particular, and the Gamp Rim are here for the same reason, albeit they do it with a phalanx as well. Now, to the second army, we have Mordor, played by TC 1351. He's got some Morannon infantry, just the rank and file of Mordor. They're not really going to do anything too special, but you don't really expect the Morannon infantry to do anything too special. They're just there to make up the numbers and not be quite as useless in melee as something like the Orc fodder is. Speaking of which, there is some Orc fodder, but they're so cheap, of course, that you bring them because they really do help bulk out your numbers, which is important for a faction like Mordor. He's actually gone for, I think, 3 units of Orc fodder, possibly just the 2. It's kind of difficult to tell when they're all blended together like this, but still, bit of extra on the front line. The Orc Maulers are a cheap unit which can really, you know, pay for themselves quite nicely if they get into melee unmolested by archers. Of course, that doesn't happen all that often, and you would not expect so with Gondor and Mirkwood on the defence either. They've got plenty of archers, which would be very good at picking the Orc Maulers off, but still, nice, cheap AP. Orc Axemen like this tend to be very efficient. And then there's obviously the stronger version as well. The Sauron's Will, substantially better in melee, more expensive of course, much more juicy target, potentially for any of those defending archers, but still very damaging. Speaking of which, Temple Guard, a real concern for a faction like Erebor as an armour-piercing archer, because they can't really respond to it in the way that they may want to, but because Erebor have got backup today, that may prove to be less of a problem anyway. But yes, armour-piercing archers that are good in melee as well, so a good choice I would suggest. Uruk Captains are a good choice as well, because they are fairly cheap as far as a Mordor bodyguard unit goes, and they are armour-piercing as well, which is nice. And they also have the Mighty Nazgul, which is the General's bodyguard unit today. Kind of difficult to tell, of course, because the General's model does blend in. And there's Gothmog, the Lumpy Orc. But yeah, Nazgul, their effectiveness depends greatly on whether or not they're committed with anything else or not. If they are, then they'll rack up a good kill count over a longer period of time. If they're not, they'll be isolated and ultimately destroyed by the higher quality defenders. Olag High, a nice spike of damage that they offer. Orc Javelins, of course, are so cheap and potentially so cost effective. And then also some Blackguard or Barad-dûr for pushing their way through defensive positions could be especially useful actually against Mirkwood, given the lighter nature of Elven units in general because of their fewer numbers. And a Troll Catapult. Nice for moving around the battlefield quickly, of course, potentially good for sniping out the Gondorian Trebuchet that we have already seen, but more on that in a moment. Then, over here in the trees, I imagine we won't see too much of this army. Sean of Gondor, who, again, there's always at least one, who wants to go against the grain, who wants to completely ruin any sort of theme that there may very well have been. Lothlorien are here, marching alongside the armies of darkness. Haldir is going to be with the Carascaladon's Guardians. The rest of the Lothlorien army, I'd imagine, probably bulked out by a few of the lower tier units, but archers are, of course, never an issue for Lorien. And finally, yeah, as I suspected, it would have been a nice themed battle if not for Sean. We've got Khand, who have got some Nurad Stormguard, very, very effective unit. They always do well. We shall see how well they can do here. The rest of the army looks to be hidden. A couple of units of Nurad Halberds over here, but I would imagine very infantry focused. Lots of Nurads, which will be very, very useful, and a few units of Brotherhood infantry, which will also do the business. Then we have Bogdan, 19k, who is playing as the Dwarves of Erebor. He has got some Blacklock Engineers in there, of course, very similar to the Dragon's Wrath we've already seen. Highborns of Erebor, there are Axguard of Erebor in there, Sons of the Fallen by the looks of things, Erebor Legionaries, Ironfoot Pikes, all of the good stuff that you want to see as the Dwarves, Ironfoot Spears, with their Sons of the Fallen officers, and some Ironfoot crossbows. So yeah, pretty much what you'd expect. Nice phalanx, solid, dependable, upper tier line infantry units backed up by crossbows of all descriptions. Can't see too much else, because he of course has got to make his way into the settlement from this side rather quickly, and he will defend, of course. But having a look at this settlement, you have, of course, the sort of canyon-like roads that are the initial approach, and potentially then you can also fall back to the highest tier of the settlement and try and defend this singular choke point, albeit it is fairly open, this settlement. It's got kind of what you could consider to be walls in these cliffs, but even still, there is a good opportunity here for the attackers to use their archers, especially seeing as really all of the attacking factions have got good access to some ranged units here, in different capacities to be sure, but so too do the defenders. Mirkwood are one of the most damaging units of one of the most damaging archer factions in the game, and one of the most damaging units of such they have are the Wardens of Amon Lank, both at range and in melee. They're a dangerous unit to face, lots of missile damage and armour-piercing, high armour-piercing melee damage with those two-handed axes. Back over here we've got some spears and blades of Emenduir. So just some nice rank-and-file Mirkwood units which will be able to punch above their weight in terms of what they cost individually, but they are a little bit lightweight, so we shall see if they stand up to scrutiny in that sense. The Hir units that Mirkwood traffic in, Hiri Lang, Hiri Ek, are there Hiri Outh as well. There's some Hiri Peng. But yeah, the heavier Mirkwood units, especially when you upgrade their armour, it brings them more into line with Lothlorien, honestly. It's a little bit strange that Mirkwood are the only ones that really have access to the facility to do this. But even so, it does bring them more into line with Lothlorien in terms of what you can expect from them up close and personal. Less AP, but higher melee defense overall is the difference between the two, which will help them here in terms of preserving their numbers. Woodland Protectors. There is also the Mighty Elven King's Palace Guard in there as well, a devastating unit of infantry indeed. And then there's some Woodland Realm Patrol mixed in amongst the Hiri Peng. A little bit surprised actually not to see... Well, Thranduil's with the Wardens of Amalek. A little bit surprised not to see any Rangers on the part of Mirkwood. Maybe they are around and they're just hidden and I can't see them. And finally, Demon's Hunter, the player who sent me the battle replay, who is playing as Gondor, occupying the highest portion of the settlement, and will probably be the first one into the fray, to be honest with you. A Trebuchet. We shall see if it gets sniped out by the attacking artillery. Pelagia Marines. We've got some veterans of Osgiliath in there as well with the armour upgrade, so nice missiles and, well, missiles of all descriptions. Gondor Spearmen, who have had the armour upgraded. Citadel Guard. Lots of spears in here, as you'd expect from Gondor. Some upgraded Axemen of Lasarnak, Fountain Guard. Yeah, pretty much by the book here from Gondor so far. And then over here we've also got some upgraded Gondor archers as well. So, without further ado, let's begin. It will be interesting this. It'll be interesting to see if Gondor and Mirkwood elect to hold this choke point from the front. I think they kind of have to. If they intend to hold this choke point over here, then they need to put up some sort of resistance here on the front edge of the settlement, because if they don't, then the two defensive positions they currently occupy will simply be exposed. Though it is worth saying that you do have to cross this bridge to get over here, which will involve some finagling, really, for lack of a better word, by Rhun, because for some reason the pathfinding in Medieval 2 is such that if you order your unit to just go over here directly, they will probably try and go around and through the defences. And if Czech Norris doesn't realise that's happening, you kind of need to force path your units across the bridges, which can be slightly awkward, to say the least. Let's go and have a little look at what's happening over here as Khan's units reveal themselves. Lots of nomadic marauders, so cheap javelins, archers as well, just some basic nomadic raiders and some upgraded Variac bowmen. I like that pick from Pantagruel. He does have some Brotherhood units, Brotherhood of the Spear, very dependable units, arguably the best Brotherhood unit to be honest with you because of how much staying power they have. And then also some upgraded Variac warriors as well, who as far as heavy swordsmen go are very cheap, not necessarily the highest quality, but they will get a job done. They also have some Glory Seekers, low tier fodder cavalry, which is something of a rarity. And then of course there is the Lawbreaker, as we shall call him, Lothlorien. Lorinand Axemen, lots of axes as you'd expect from Lothlorien as well. Fairly high tier army this, I'd have to say. There is also a few Spears of the Wood in there, some Staff Masters, and there's also some basic Lorinand archers. I say basic, more basic than the Watchers of the Golden Wood. We shall see how this goes. They definitely have all of these skirmishers they could possibly want for here, the attackers, and I would suggest they should be looking to try and skirmish the enemy down first and foremost, especially seeing as Erebor can't really stop them from doing that. They only have their crossbows after all, although it is possible of course the superior terrain means that won't matter too much and they will be able to get into range. Interesting to see where Mordor go as well. I mean, personally I would say they should cross the bridges with the vast bulk of their army, if not all of it, purely because if they leave Rhun to their own devices to go into a Gondor army that has had more money spent on it, then even though Rhun have got the armour piercing to cause Gondor a problem, Gondor will still be victorious there. Their ability to hold the line outstrips Rhune's armour piercing when the funds are not equal. And Gondor will be all too pleased if that is the case, but with some Mordor backup, with some numbers, that becomes a different prospect, and Gondor really will be tested. And from the other side, Gondor though probably, perhaps it would be perceived that Gondor would be the easiest foe to fight of the three on display here. I think it depends a little bit. Stegri 4, by the way, playing as Mirkwood. I think while Erebor do have a lot in melee, up close and personal, Gondor do have some nice support in the form of those archers, whereas Erebor have to be, once their crossbows are in range, don't get me wrong, it can be a real horror show to deal with, but still. And they will be crossing the bridge. They will be doing so with Morannon infantry. Again, the equivalent Gondorian units are going to be stronger, but numbers are the order of the day here. As they cross over this deep gorge, which I think was meant to be a river at one stage, but it was just never filled with water. So it has the, looks rather dangerous, doesn't it? Precarious looking bridges, bit of subsidence. Peng will be able to take up a good position. Rhun marching through their own encampment to get into position. And Mirkwood will be holding this road over here as well. Erebor will be getting into the settlement. There will be no chasing down. Khand only had one unit of cavalry after all. And they were never going to be able to do much, to be honest with you, against the sheer amount of anti-cavalry that Erebor can bring to bear here. Lots of Ironfoot pikes, Ironfoot spears. The works. Erebor's melee prowess is going to be important in this battle, I feel. Especially against a faction like Mordor. The armour piercing of stuff like the Axe Guard can crack through Mordor's numbers really, really well. Lothlorien are a bit of a wild card in this situation, aren't they? As law-breaking as it is, the strengths that they bring to the table are very different to the strengths of their allies today. They have to be all about that quality. Meanwhile, what's going on here? Morale on infantry. Oh, right, they're getting off the bridge. Travelling through the mud. Morale on infantry moving forward. And they will be moving forward to skirmish with the enemy first and foremost, which the Variac Mercenaries can do. Fully upgraded Gondor archers and Variac Mercenaries. You give the edge to the Gondor archers there because the armour advantage they have is fairly significant with the upgrades, but the shield means that, to be honest, the fight is relatively even. To the point where Rhun will definitely take it. Even trades are something that the attackers will always prefer to the defenders. Here Peng in position, only a single unit of spears in place for the moment, keeping the rest of his army back so as to try and avoid, presumably, the wrath of something like the Troll Catapult shooting over the cliffs into his army as it's set up. It could just be that Khand have to attack this side of the settlement on their own, which I would think is a bit of a mistake from the attackers. I mean, if I were on the attacking team, I'd be telling Lothlorien, you know, what on earth do you think you're doing? Go over and support Khand. Otherwise they're going to just bounce off the Dwarven defence without the support of the Dark Elves, as we shall be referring to them. Spears of Evenduir, I mean, just a singular unit. A slow burn to start this battle off with. Well, if Lothlorien refuses to go over there, then maybe you could say that Mordor should only send a portion of these units over here. Orc fodder moving across as well. Shorn of Gondor. I can sense a little bit of fraudulence going on here from the Lawbreaker. If he's just going to bulk up his army into one big blob and allow his allies to basically take the hits for him, that's not something I can get behind. And I hope that he is punished for that accordingly with a loss, if that turns out to be the case. But it could be an effective way of going about the battle. A fully healthy Lothlorien army in the late game when all of the defenders are a little bit damaged could be the way forward, but how damaged are they really going to be? Like I said, I think Erebor are going to be quite comfortable as long as they maintain their shape against Khand. Gondor may very well take hits against Mordor and Rhun, but then they've got Mirkwood to step into the void that they leave. We shall have to wait and see. We will go up to ×2 speed now though, just to get things rolling along nicely. Variac Mercenaries in place. They're waiting for some Mordor reinforcements. Rhun going right around to the edge of the map so they can move forward quickly, but they're not in range of the archers. I like that. Good. Lots of Mordor units still making their way across. No, sure. Was he? Ooh, hello. Here we go. Back down to single speed as the Trebuchet firing in. Definitely the right thing to do here, because the Trebuchet can be so damaging with its splash damage if you hit centre mass. There is also some Carmel Shadow Guard that have revealed themselves, another unit that is very fine when it comes to dealing with armoured units, so they will be all too happy to see a Gondorian defence laid on for them. Trebuchet still firing. A nice hit into some upper tier units is what that Trebuchet is going to be hoping for here. Just falling short. Disappointing so far from the Trebuchet, considering how much surface area Rhun are covering. It's really unfortunate for Demon's Hunter that his Trebuchet hasn't done anything as of yet in terms of damage. But that's what artillery can be like. I was going to say I thought that Lorien had crossed with a couple of units, but I was incorrect about that. Instead it is Mordor, mostly Mordor, that have done so. Variac Mercenaries going forward, Moran on infantry backing them up. as Rhun start to move forwards. Gondor archers now in range. Be interesting to see what they're firing at. Not the most damaging archer, but they're certainly competent. Going after, by the looks of things, Flagrim. I mean, from the front, Flagrim have got good enough armour and shield that it'll take a little while to burn through them in that way, but better them than the Scion Rim, because they represent a bigger damage threat, and the Scion Rim are bulkier. So from that point of view, he's doing the right thing. Around on infantry marching forward. Beginnings of the fight. Trebuchet not firing anymore, I think, seeing he was wasting too much of his ammo. Now the fact that Rhun have spread out a bit more, it becomes a little bit more of a difficult prospect to make your money back on a Trebuchet if you're firing in recklessly like that. Variac Mercenaries, 2 units of them firing in. Gondor Archers going to need to try and get behind their stakes, because you can notice the Carmel's Dragon Knights are moving forward. They will get behind the stakes quickly enough, but they're getting shot all the while by the Variac Mercenaries, and a few of these brave fighting men of Gondor do fall. Not that many though. Forward comes the Scion Rim. Going to move forward as well. I mean, they're doing the right thing here, the attackers. I do think that the way to go about things is to use up your ammunition and soften them up first. You have 2 heavy-duty factions in Gondor and Erebor with the armour and the line-holding capabilities, and then you have more of a damage dealer in Mirkwood, so it's a good composition for the defenders here. Flagrim under fire, but not taking much in the way of damage so far, so they'll be happy about that. Forward go the Variac Mercenaries again, so they're going to get fairly close to proceedings here. A point-blank archer fight. Again, 2v1, of course the Variac Mercenaries will win. But do they want to fire in just yet, or do they want to bide their time? Maybe shoot over. You can see some dwarves are also over here now, Ironfoot spears, perhaps sensing the fact that, you know, only Cand are over here. And you can see they're already taking damage from the elves up on the cliff. Woodland Realm Patrol firing into the unshielded Nurad halberds. You could certainly do worse in terms of armour than the Nurads, but it's not going to be enough to save them from elven damage and accuracy. And they're taking losses already, which may force Pantagruel into an even earlier engagement than he was hoping for as his units start marching down the road. I definitely think that, you know, getting a unit like the Nomadic Raiders, more than one archer I think would be needed to sort of diffuse the situation here. Woodland Realm Patrol, it's not ideal terrain this for the elves, but they may as well fire in. The Nurad halberds are a good enough target. And of course, if Cand are hurried, if they move in before they're ready, they will lose even harder. It's not a huge force on the front line this, but it's enough to hold a substantial army at bay for long enough for the ranged contingent of these armies to do the business. Horns of Amalek, what have we got over here? Eerie Pang are firing as well. Firing at what would be my question. The Lothlorien units. The real question here is, how much damage is he doing? I mean, the Lorenan spears, they're pointing the wrong way, which is why they're falling here rather quickly. Eerie Pang have got very good base damage, of course, but Lorenan spears, good armour, very good shields. But if you're pointing the wrong way, those shields aren't coming into effect, and already Lorien's elite army being made to pay. We shall see if that has any impact later. Meanwhile, Variac Mercenaries firing point blank into the Gondor archers. Doesn't look like they're getting on too well. But then again, point blank shots like this, skirmishing like this is certainly, you know, it's what I would be doing as Rhun. I'd be sending forward both my units of archers first then. Going up through the middle we have some orc fodder. Potentially going to engage them in melee. Not the worst idea, it'll force them back at the very least. Obviously Ironfoot warriors will dumpster orc fodder in melee very easily. But then most things will dumpster orc fodder. It's not the sort of thing that deserves recognition by any means. What's going on over here? Can't be router units already, surely. Yeah, you can see this is the problem when it comes to pathing around bridges. Some Saurons will have elected to go this way, and so have the Olag High, because there's a land bridge and the units prefer the land bridge so much in the pathfinding that they will avoid the bridge that's right next to them to use the land bridge. Meanwhile, the first melee engagement getting underway now. Orc fodder against Ironfoots. And naturally, the armour-clad dwarves will have a field day in this battle. More Ironfoot warriors coming forward as well, so the dwarves actually taking up the slack early on here on this choke point as well. Gondor biding their time and waiting with their archers in support, but it's good synergy this. I like the fact that it's not just one army per choke point, they're mixing and matching, which means you're mixing and matching the faction's strengths as well. Meanwhile, nomadic raiders firing in. It's not the best angle, but they're still hitting the dwarves. Any hits they get on the Ironfoot pikes could result in some kills, but even then, you're talking about the entry-level Candish archer firing into a dwarven front line. The armour should do its work, you would imagine. And then they still have their units in the final stand as well. Let's have a look here. So yeah, Ironfoot's easily going to be able to deal with the first wave of Orc fodder. They need some quality in there as well. Orc fodder only really do their work properly when they're acting as a meat shield for something a little bit better. If you just throw them in on their own, then they're going to get mopped up very, very quickly, and Ironfoot warriors will love fighting Orc fodder. Pretty much the perfect unit for them to fight. Meanwhile, there is a unit coming over here, some Spears of the Wood. One unit of Spears of the Wood. That's not going to be enough. Fairly lightweight. I mean, they're decent. They and the Spears of Amenduir are more or less the same unit, to be honest with you. However, Spears of the Wood have got plenty of backup, both ranged and melee, so that's not going to go too well for them. Meanwhile, yeah, one unit of Orc fodder has already been largely dealt with. Morale on infantry will do better, but they will still lose ultimately to the Ironfoot warriors. I'm surprised the Ironfoot warriors are shaken, actually. Gondor archers getting into position. What's going on there? Surprising. I mean, they're going to get reinforced, I would imagine, by some Gondor spears, which will stabilise things. I guess because there's not many of them. I mean, there's support close enough by that morale shouldn't really be an issue. I know that Erebor's morale is slightly lower than that of Khazad-dûm's, but not to the extent where fodder and morale on infantry should be causing panic among the ranks. We'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Meanwhile, Canned with the unenviable task of pushing through the Valley of Death. The dwarves unflinching so far. But Pantagruel, I mean, I can understand Pantagruel's reluctance to move in here because it's... What is it he's expected to do against a dwarven line that they can reinforce at any time they like, really? Unless, I guess he could move forward with everything he has quickly now, but too many of his units are too far back. And as soon as he makes moves to move his whole army forwards, that's when more reinforcements will make their way down here and making it somewhat of a moot point. Meanwhile, there is a way around the back over here, and so far the Gondorians have been skirmished fairly substantially, you'd have to say. The Eastron crossbows doing the business against the Gondorian archers, and I didn't notice this, to be fair. I think once upon a time this part of the map was actually behind the red line. Not so anymore, and Rhun are able to pressurise things, a gap that they can definitely utilise, but there's some good units back here. Pikes, armour-piercing spears, heavy swordsmen, heavy elven swordsmen at that. So it's easier said than done, the task here of trying to deal with this. I don't necessarily disagree with one army pushing up each choke point. If they're going to do that, they need to do it in a more unified fashion than they have currently managed. One assault is already underway, and it's not going too well, with the Gondor spearmen now committed. Rhun infantry still fighting the good fight, but the superior defensive stats of the Gondor spearmen will ultimately pay dividends in this particular fight. Gondor archers looping their shots a little bit. It's a little bit interesting. There's a lot of Lothlorien units crossing over here now. Spears of the Wood not doing too well. The support of the archers and the superior numbers now of the Spears of Amenduir mean that Mirkwood is going to be quite comfortable in this fight, you'd have to say. But Lorien are rolling the dice here a little bit. This isn't the entirety of their army by any means. Can, meanwhile, nomadic raiders, I think they're going to try and shoot into the side of these Hiri Peng, unless I'm very much mistaken. Do a little bit of damage to them, but I mean they're still just going to continue to pour fire into this part of the map over here. Norad footmen moving forward, still just slowly pushing up. Could be, with an attack from the rear from Rhun, maybe Khand could push forward hyper-aggressively and get some results. Is it indeed? Rhun have got some units. I think they were trying to get up here. I would imagine that's impassable terrain, though. There is actually another way up here as well, which is rather interesting. Gaps that I wasn't seeing. And these Scion Rim have taken a ton of damage. In fact, there's been a substantial melee fight over here that I've completely missed because I didn't even realise this was a choke point. I can't imagine this is an intentional choke point based on the positioning of the buildings and the wall or cliff. But Axemen of the Sarnak, Scion Rim. Support, however, the Pelagia Marines. Proving to be all important, really. This one Scion Rim ultimately going to fall eventually to these Pelagia Marines. Don't understand what those Gondor archers are doing firing at him, to be honest with you. There's no need for it. And then this front line over here looking like a second unit of Gondor spearmen have moved forward. I mean, there's Nazgul on the front line now. They did arrive when the fodder was still operational. That may not be the case much longer, though, and then the Nazgul will be a little bit isolated. Fortunately, however, another unit of Moran on infantry being committed forward to give them a bit of support. Variacs will also whip out their axes and get into melee. What is going on back here then? Variac Mercenaries going to try and get into position to fire. They will manage it. What are they actually targeting would be my question. I mean, Veterans of Osgiliath. They're an archer unit, so I can understand why, but they're a very tanky archer unit. Very tanky archer unit. Meanwhile, this, an Elven Rumble here in the northern entrance to the settlement. Blades of the Wood pushing up with Staff Masters. Very high melee defense Staff Masters, but kind of a underwhelming unit in every other aspect, really. And they will fight. Moran on infantry over here as well, so Mordor offering some support with fodder and Moran on infantry, but that's not going to be enough, ultimately, if they want to push through this part of the map. So far, though, only really the basics from both Elven factions have been committed, so it's not as if we're seeing Lorien armed units. This, however, will certainly turn the tide of this central battle in favour of the defenders. Erebor Legionaries are an upper end line infantry unit for them. Very strong. It'll take more than basics to finish them off. Meanwhile, Khand now are pushing onto the front line, and the pikes are actually not in melee properly, which means they're not getting the best out of them. So the armor piercing of Khand will temporarily at least be very effective against something like the upgraded Ironfoot warriors. They're just not going to have the... it's pretty much the perfect tool to use against them, any sort of armor piercing. And a combination of the halberds and mace men here. Let's see. Now the pikes are closing up. We should be able to hold a lot of those Khandish forces at arm's length. Nomadic Raiders trying to fire in. A few stray hits onto the Woodland Realm Patrol over here. But again, I'm not sure. You're getting some damage done, but is it enough? Time will tell. Like I said, I think if you were the attackers, you could really take advantage, potentially anyway, of all of the ranged tools you have. Flag Rim moving forward, Variac Mercenaries and support. Spears, Ironfoot Spears will want to avoid the Flag Rim, at least if they're facing them on their own, because that armor-piercing punch that the Flag Rim have is not to be taken lightly. Gondor Archers firing away. Still the fight over on this hill continues. Goes to show how durable actually the Scion Rim really are. And a bit of a trap laid by Rhun. A unit that's already largely finished and done for. And he's strong crossbowman. Able to get some good hits here into the Pelagia Marines. Moran on infantry are here as well, firing in. Well, not the Moran on infantry, but Mordor here in general. Some Variac mercenaries still over here, but this is the sort of situation that Gondor can ride out better than most, and to be fair, Erebor as well. Both sides still only content to commit their less important units for the most part. Scion Rim, probably the most elite unit we've seen committed by anyone so far. Ironfoot Spears. Another unit of Ironfoot Spears anyway moving forward, and they will finish off that unit of Moran 1 infantry really very quickly. Just blitz through them and then potentially actually engage the Variac Mercenaries in melee, which would be a good choice, I think. Meanwhile, some slightly more serious units committed by the Elves, perhaps in response to the Erebor Legionaries now being close to the front line, but still uncommitted at the moment. Variac, also from Mirkwood, but Lothlorien and Axemen are a serious concern, especially for the more lightly armoured Mirkwood Spears. That, I would assume, is the Mordor general, based on the fact that the Nazgul have already been committed, and they were a little bit isolated. Some reinforcements did arrive, but ultimately, not enough to save. I mean, yeah, unfortunate, I guess, because only 2 of the Nazgul unit have actually been killed, one of which being the general. But that is the risk you run when you commit such a small unit into a fight like that. And there we have Gondor Spears charging in, preventing the Orc Javelins from getting into a nice position to throw their payload. However, in so doing, the Gondor Spears have engaged with the Orc Maulers, which is not a great fight for them. The Orc Maulers' quality is still to the level where the Gondor Spears can probably outlast them, but this is exactly the sort of fight where you can get some good value with these Orcish Axemen. Meanwhile, what are Rhun doing back here? I mean, to be honest, I think Rhun do need to be putting a little bit more pressure on back here, because they do have the opportunity to do so. You see here the Flag Rim moving forward, Gondor Archers against Variac Mercenaries. That's interesting, actually. I'd imagine the Variac Mercenaries would win that fight. A little bit more well suited for melee combat, but the armour, I guess, does make a substantial difference. I mean, it doesn't really matter if Rhun can surround them, but I guess they can't charge into the back of that unit with the Flag Rim, because if they do, they will be counter-surrounded by stuff like the Citadel Guard that are waiting in expectancy. And we'll see if they do that now, because those Gondor Archers won't last long at all when they're surrounded, especially not when it's an armour-piercing unit that's hitting them in the side. Meanwhile, what are Khand doing over here? I mean, they are serious about this attack, Khand. They're sending forward javelins now, bombarding the Dwarven position. And there is the Brotherhood of the Spear on the front line as well, which are a solid enough unit to the point where it should give Khand the survivability to actually eventually push through this Dwarven phalanx. There's still some Erebor Legionaries back there as well, which is a concern because of how good they are, but provided Khand keep up the pressure, I see no reason why they shouldn't go on to be victorious here. That Troll Catapult appears to be somewhat stuck, which is a little bit unfortunate. Meanwhile, Lothlorien Spearmen and Lothlorien Warriors arriving on the front line now. Did those dwarves leave again? Nope, they are still in there. They were committed eventually, which is good. This is a lot of quality on the front line from Lothlorien, though. They really can't afford to exit this fight empty-handed at this point. They need to get some sort of win from this engagement. If they don't, it will be a problem for them moving forwards. More arrows coming in from Khand. Still the Glory Seekers. There's still the Dragon Knights somewhere as well, which they had an opportunity earlier, I think, to actually attack into the settlement. They would have been thwarted eventually, but it would have caused panic in the defenders, and that could have been the way to proceed. Blackguard of Barad-dûr thinking about moving in, but there's still a lot of spears, Gondorian and Dwarven. Good opportunity here, though, for the Dragon's Wrath crossbows to shoot right down the line. It may only be basic units over here, but it's a lot of damage that's going to be done very quickly here, and it's the sort of losses the defenders don't really want to take if they want to hold on to this front line. Yeah, that's going to be pretty devastating indeed. The numbers tumble and they're shaken. I'm not surprised either. That's something I'm not surprised that's causing the dwarves some pause. Potentially then, of course, the Dragon Knights need to be a little bit careful with the stakes, but as long as you walk through them, they're harmless. Pelagia Marines are going to move forward to try and stop the Dragon's Wrath crossbows from firing, and they will succeed, but a lot of damage has already been done, so I'm not sure if this is going to really make a difference. Going to have to roll forward. Sauron's Will on the front line as well, and with the damage those Dragon's Wrath crossbows just did, it could be these heavy axemen have what it takes to burn down the brave rank and file soldiers of Gondor. Variac here as well. So yeah, Carmel's chosen, Flagrim, this is a little bit more like it. Now that they're making up ground on one choke point, they can start pressurising others as well, and this is generally how you can make the dominoes fall. I'm amazed those Gondor archers are still fighting. Flagrim arriving to replace the unit that is routing. Carmel's chosen as well, which is a significant addition to the front line, but lots of armour piercing to meet them. Citadel Guard and Axe Guard of Erebor together may very well be enough to thwart this runic assault, but as long as they're keeping up the pressure, as long as they're doing damage, I would say it's still worth it. They were going to try and get some Balcoth tribesmen so they can actually come up this way, which is remarkable when you think about it. There's plenty of ways that Rhun could have exploited this situation back here. Balcoth tribesmen are going to have to leave. I mean, yeah, javelins into the side of this front line would be a real problem. Citadel Guards still in reserve. Meanwhile, Lothlorien going to have what it takes. It's looking increasingly more like the answer is going to be no. There's still javelins back here, there's still a lot of Lothlorien units back here, and I think he's simultaneously made the mistake of not committing enough, but also committing too much. Like, you need to go one way or the other. You can't go sort of half-seas like he's gone here, otherwise you will end up paying for it later on. And I think it's because he wanted to attack, he saw an opportunity, but he didn't have the bottle or the nerve to move forward with his elites, to put them on the line. Or at least not enough of them. And he may very well end up paying quite dearly for that. Canned. What are they going to do? I mean, the Brotherhood of the Spear is still holding on. The Dwarves do need some support on this front line at this point, I think. Slowly but surely their numbers are faltering. Those Gondor Spears are routing. They weren't committed over here, I don't think. I think they're just routing off the map, and they found themselves over here. Nomadic Raiders out of ammunition. They're not worth that much in melee, to be fair, but you may as well throw them in. And they can absorb some ammunition from on high, especially when it's Ironfoot crossbow ammunition. Crossbow bolts are valuable commodities. Meanwhile, there's some Sons of Durin over here, which is interesting, isn't it? The Sons of Durin, they probably most closely resemble the Iron Hills Mattocks, which are an entry-level unit in deck. So I'm all turned around when it comes to assessing the Dwarven units by quality, simply by looks. And the Iron Guard, a basic unit by Reforged standards, is a tier 3 unit. These strong crossbows getting into a good position. This could be an issue. Rhun starting to pile on some pressure back here. More reinforcements needed. Veterans of Osgiliath scurrying around, warns of Minister Thiel. I mean, they need to do something here. If the Sons of Durin aren't going to engage, they should retreat. Otherwise, they could find themselves getting caught. At this point, I don't think it's really worth trying to salvage this front line. Ever since the Gamp Rim have arrived, things seem to have gone south. Done a lot of damage, to be fair. There's not much of the Carmel's chosen left. But Rhun ultimately have what they want, and this front line is starting to falter. Variac fighting bravely, but kind of out of position. What's going on over here? It's not looking great. This looks like, yeah, combination of armor-piercing infantry and those devastating Dragon's Wrath crossbows have facilitated a Mordor push further into the town. Only 6 Nazgul remain, so slowly but surely they're losing steam. Heavy Dwarven Axemen are here to meet them. Hiri, Lang, Woodland Protectors are there. What will Mordor do, though? Do they push in with all they have? I personally would, because if the defenders are not prepared to either pull back or recommit, redouble their efforts. Axguard are fighting now. Javelins attempting to fire in. I mean, going after something like the Fountain Guard is good. Balchoth Tribesmen are in the back, however, and this is where things could go horribly, horribly wrong for the defenders, because I don't think they were decisive enough in either committing more to the front or pulling back. It's a very similar issue. Fountain Guard, victory is a distinct possibility, as you would expect. backed up by Dwarven pikes as they are, even if the Saurons were a pretty scary unit. This could be a problem though. The Blackguard of Barad-dûr could try and bulldoze their way through the joint Gondorian Dwarven front line, which would be a bit of an issue for them. Trebuchet waiting for the opportune moment as well. Elders of the Elven King with their silver thorns knocking the Sauron's will over. Ones of Minas Ithil, of course, got those armour-piercing arrows as well. I think a little bit of arrow support wouldn't go amiss over here. Veterans of Osgiliath perhaps were providing that, but they're out of ammo now. They're also going to be supported by the Sons of Durin, which in the back of the Gamprim is going to provide a real problem for the Easterlings. And what have we here? Still Khan struggling to break through. Eventually they will, I'm sure, but when looking at the lay of the land in this battle, I thought this was always going to be a potential issue, although Khan have done better perhaps than I was expecting, but that could also have something to do with the fact that the Dwarves haven't been focused on this choke point. They have been offering aid to Mirkwood and Gondor elsewhere. Mirkwood's still holding on over here with units. There really isn't much left of the elves at all. But where are the elves? What happened to them? Are they going to use this way to get into the settlement? I think they probably are. Yeah, and here we are, Lothlorien going this path, which I think is probably wise. It's a free way into the settlement without having to go through more Mirkwood resistance, even if Lothlorien at this point I think could deal with them. Horns of Minas Ithil taking shots, but I mean they're going to be able to do a lot of damage with their armour piercing. They should be looking to go after the Lothlorien units in behind if they can. Those Lothlorien swordmasters getting absolutely hammered by the Elders of the Elven King. Very nice indeed. 9-foot crossbows back here as well. They're using the fire arrows on the trebuchet, trying to burn it down. Definitely worthwhile, I think. If you are able to burn these artillery pieces down, it would mean that's a lot of money spent on something which has ultimately done nothing, because those shots it took earlier, of course, were not very effective at all. Camels, Dragon Knights trying to do something, but you saw there an example actually of the Elven King's Palace Guard doing their thing. Combined with the Sons of Durin as well, that's an enormous amount of damage those Dragon Knights would have been taking very quickly. And it definitely shows, because they were falling fast in a way that you wouldn't expect one of the tankiest knights in the game to do against just any old unit. Lothian Honor Guard are over here as well, so actually they have turned the tide on Rhun. But to do so they've had to commit a lot of elites, and this could leave the door open elsewhere in the settlement. That has to be how the attackers think, if they are to be successful. Well, Troll Catapult, I think they had to abandon their artillery, so they're just going to be used in the way that standard trolls are, and this is a big push actually from Khan. Brotherhood of the Spear. Highborns of Erebor move, but I'm not sure whether it's actually worth trying to salvage this situation over here for the defenders. It might be worth trying to pull back closer to more reinforcements, but I mean they have tried to salvage it. More Ironfoot Pikes, I mean Highborns of Erebor are a big committal. And there are still Blacklocks which are firing with body-piercing bolts, so I mean they're there for the long haul now. What is this? Mirkwood? Hiri Peng, Lornan Swordmasters. Interesting sight of two Elven Swordsmen facing off against, well, Elven Archer and Swordsman, but still. The principles, it still looks the part when you consider that the unit model is the same, just with a bow and a quiver. And actually there are Hiri Lang right over here, supporting the push of some Axe Guard, absolutely destroying some Orc Javelins in the fashion that you would expect. And still trading shots with one another. They haven't managed to burn down the trebuchet yet, and it could be because they've actually changed target. It looks like they're now going after the wards of Minas Ithil, and they are. I would have stayed the course, honestly. I would have tried to burn that trebuchet down. It's risky because it may not work, but I think it's worth the risk. Meanwhile, Lornan Spearmen surrounding, dismantling the Fountain Guard. Taking hits while they do it, but now the shields are pointing the right way. They're standing up to it much better. Citadel Guard over here, pretty much the opposite problem, as Lorien gets surrounded and poked to death. Check Norris, meanwhile, his runic army is really running on fumes at this point. There's still some Carmel's Shadow Guard remaining, but not for much longer, you'd think. Gondor, really all of the factions have done a good job at dismantling them here. The Dragon Knights do come back for another attack. They need to cycle out very quickly, though, as they charge into the Elven King's Palace Guard. There's really no soft targets anymore, which is the problem. I wouldn't try and chase down the crossbows with the Lothlorien Honor Guard, though. They make too tempting a target for those Eastron skirmishers. Lords of Amon Lank waiting, axes drawn, ready for battle. Ironfoot crossbows firing in, bolts finding their mark, doing good damage to the Lorien Arm Spears, to be fair. And it's at this point in proceedings where I'm not sure, do they have enough, the attackers? Do they have enough left in the tank as we enter the final phases of this battle? Will they break through over here? I was thinking they would, and the addition of the reinforcements, actually, I think more arrived as well. Yeah, Erebor legionaries are there, 60 of them, in addition to the one that was committed earlier. So these reinforcements were enough, and Khan still not able to have the impact they undoubtedly would have wanted. Brotherhood of the Shadows going to try and use their throwing daggers, I would presume. More nomadic marauders, Variac warriors, Variac bowmen. Do they have anything left, Khan? What's this back over here? What have they? Nurad halberds? Yeah, they should be looking to just sort of throw everything in at this point. Again, they're in a very similar situation as Rhun were on the back edge of the settlement. Even if they lose, they've lost too much at this point to sort of go out with a whimper here. They need to genuinely test the defenders and hope, I suppose, that Mordor and Lorien's push continues and they're victorious, but I don't know. Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Here come the Caras Galadon's Guardians. Could be one of the most feared units left on the field late on. But lots of damage being done there, Woodland Protectors throwing in. Doing damage to the Guardians and to the Temple Guard. There's also Greenwood Rangers, so we do have a unit of Elven Rangers on display. And undoubtedly they will be doing the business. These Trolls doing good damage, but they will be burnt down eventually because they're dealing with high damage Elven units. And the Javelins and Rangers will be trying to do the same to the Guardians, who have actually been ripped apart by the Rangers and the Javelins on the approach. Very well done, I'd have to say, from the defenders, because that is a high priority target that they have managed to deal with very competently. Javelins rolling forwards, as well as the Blackguards. They're going to try and push through. With the Trolls still alive, this could be a winning plan by Mordor. Just rolling the dice here. Trying to get those Dragon's Wrath crossbows into a good position as well. Rangers are going to do a lot of damage continuously. Rhun look like they have been thoroughly dismantled. At least their attacking force has been at this stage. Just Ironfoot crossbows. They're just trying to skirmish, really, use their crossbows and be a bit more of an annoyance, which is a good idea, I think. It is a good idea. Meanwhile, still 20 Palace Guard, which is a substantial amount. Significant. This attack over here, though, pretty much what the attackers are pinning their hopes on as they continue to try and move forward, continue to try and do the business. Bolts raining down on them all the while from the Ironfoot crossbows. Still Woodland Protectors in the way, but they should be barged out the way by Trolls and Blackguard, finished off by Guardians and Azuric Captains as well, who are still fairly healthy. Lots of routing as well, so that push did bear fruit. And now the Greenwood Rangers are exposed. They're going to get one last volley off, but again, with their shields pointing the right way, the Blackguard of Barad-dûr will stand up to that better than pretty much any other unit in the game. Other than the Blackwatch Legion, of course, a little bit bulkier. The Angmar Great Shield Infantry, meanwhile. Yeah, the Variac warriors doing their best, but as a heavy swordsman, they don't have as much to give as some others. And they're up against Highborns of Erebor, so you can't expect miracles. Wooden Realm Patrol firing in. But drawing the fire quite nicely at the Variac Bowmen, actually. And over here, the Blacklock Engineers trying to kill off more of these Variacs. try and do that. Let's see now. Lots of routing. How is this push going? Because I do think this is where the battle will be decided. If Mordor and Lothlorien can be successful here with this push to some extent, then it's on. Yeah, that trebuchet needs to start doing something from Demon's Hunter, and he is going to attempt to do so now. Because if he waits too long, there's going to be nothing to defend the trebuchet, and they'll just be able to walk up to it and start killing the crew in melee, which would have meant he's just simply waited too long to actually make good use of it. We'll have to wait and see. Still 23 Guardians. You can see they got ripped apart at range, but as soon as they got into melee, they started taking far less damage. Sons of Durin's still alive as well, trying to save the Rangers, but arriving a little bit too late. Silver lining, though, is that the Sons of Durin are going to be perfect for dismantling the Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Any survivability they have is going to be cracked by the Warhammers. And there's still some units over here. You can see here the Ironfoot crossbows being cycle charged by the Dragon Knights, but really Rhun doing the right thing, trying to be an annoyance. They are kind of engaged in melee at this point, however. Still being shot though, point blank. Execution style, and there they go, they're going to charge back in, which is what they should be doing. Just preventing those crossbows from firing in the first place. Rather a footnote to proceedings. I doubt a unit of battered Ironfoot crossbows in melee will be the difference maker, but if it is, Rhun is performing a valuable service. And it does look as though Khand, finally, I think, yeah, the Highborns have been retreated, as have the Erebor Legionaries, so they have actually allowed Khand the victory in the end, but they don't have much of a choice, really. Their expertise is needed elsewhere to prevent the Mordor move forward. And yeah, this is where trolls can be very effective. They haven't really... They were brushing up against Hiri Lang, but they actually pushed into the spears more than anything else. And as a result of not really fighting standard troll counters, they've actually managed to maintain their existence. Still damage being done, Citadel Guard trying to stand in the way, but I mean, at this point you can see not much of anything left from the attackers. The Sons of Durin stand triumphant. I think it's just a case of Lorien not having enough left to actually support the Mordor push. They tried their best, but in the end I don't think it's going to be enough, which will result ultimately in Mordor's attempt being thwarted, and that will of course leave Khand all on their lonesome, and when they're bottled up in a choke point against the level of quality that the defenders still have, I think we are heading towards a defending victory. There goes the Dwarven General though. Could make the difference when facing Erebor units, but not enough of a difference, I don't think. More of those trolls start to fall. The Lothian Honor Guard, yeah, still too healthy, and they're managing to surround the Karas Galadon's Guardians here. And they will finish them off. The Trebuchet hasn't even been all that effective, but that's the only thing I would consider to be a bit of a waste from the defenders. Everything else has played its part nicely. And the last roll of the dice is going to have to be from Pantagruel and Khand, but I really don't think he's got the quality to be dealing with stuff like Nimlothian Honor Guard, Sons of Durin, Highborns of Erebor, all together. And then we have Elven King's Palace Guard as well, possibly the scariest of them all with their melee defense, to be honest with you. There goes Haldir. Finished off. Actually, the Dragon Knights are up here trying to bring down the Trebuchet, so Rhun still. One last spit in the eye, I suppose. And now it's just going to be a case of trying to burn down what Khand have remaining. Throw everything in. Nirad Halberds will hold on for a time. The Highborns actually return from whence they came. Again, a very serious unit indeed. this over here? A green arrow. Flying in? No, that can't be right. That's routing units. I thought it might be, but you never know. Pathfinding can be weird on maps with bridges, and one unit could have found its way all the way back there. Ironfoot crossbowman. And over here, elders, wardens, all good stuff. Lothlorien honor guard. Going to join the Highborns, which they do need a bit of reinforcements to be fair. The Highborns, they're hideously outnumbered by these Nurad halberds, and that will be a continuing problem. Brotherhood of the Sword moving forwards as well. Wood and Realm Patrol, who have been heavily depleted but still firing their missiles into Khand. It's been an unenviable task for Khand, and they needed a little bit of support, I think, to get through a choke point as grisly as this. There's a few things I would have done differently as the attacks. I think Rhun could have exploited the map a little bit more. It could be that he was told not to go through this choke point over here, but I don't see why that should be a rule that's imposed, to be honest with you. But he could have done. It may have been none, but he was told not to there. Lorien, I think, probably should have split. He should have been a supporting tool, Lorien, certainly. But he shouldn't have gone all in for supporting Mordor. He should have split his support half and half for Mordor and Khand, I think. And then attacking in a more unified fashion, as we've seen lately. It's been the downfall of many an attacking force where they just haven't been unified enough. Ironfoot crossbowman. Yeah, at this point it really is. I mean, you know, lots of Variac bowmen. Reasonably solid as a unit for what they are, but they're not going to stand a chance considering the calibre of units that they still have to try and deal with. Vets of Osgiliath. There's Variac warriors as well, who will do a little better. Finally, the Runic General dies to some woodland protectors. We saw him actually just a second ago on the back edge of the settlement, doing his level best over here, but just not enough of them in the end. And Rhun, they may have been an annoyance, but ultimately, ever since their attack started to falter over here, that was all they could be, so I can't really blame Chuck Norris for that. Over here, routing Eastron crossbows. Mordor made the most progress into the settlement itself, you'd have to say. It's most widespread as well, with Lorien, of course, following them in. But even they weren't able to genuinely put pressure on the higher levels. I don't really count the Runic cavalry worming their way through and taking tiny little bites out of the artillery crew as pressure. And finally, the cavalry has been thwarted anyway. So if you're looking at it from that way, I guess Rhun made it up the highest, but I think in terms of actual meaningful progress, it was Mordor that made it the furthest in, but perhaps you would expect that given the usage of trolls and Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Ironfoots. And Lothlorien Honor Guard as well, of course, a fantastic hole in the line because they're spears. The armour piercing will only help them against Khand. Let's see here. Do they actually have anything left? There's a few. Well, they do have the Glory Seekers, I suppose, but like the Glory Seekers are not really going to do much. Is that 2 units of Glory Seekers or just the 1? There are 2 red arrows, so it could be 2 units of Glory Seekers, I suppose. But no, there's no red halberds as well. It's just the 1. But yeah, Glory Seekers not going to be sufficient. Hey, look, cannons. You can tell this is standard Medieval 2 assets put into this map, if you can see them there. And the Realm Patrol still firing in, slowly and surely. And I think at this is pretty much the only area of the map that there's any action going on, other than potentially the Glory Seekers later, but time is a ticking down if he actually wants to utilise the Glory Seekers in any capacity. And I think, yeah, he's just going to throw them into the front here, and he charged them through stakes anyway. Alas, we won't get to see the Glory Seekers try and push their way through because they couldn't see the stakes under the corpses. It could be that actually moved back and now he's charging through again. One of them gets thrown once more. Brotherhood of the Shadows still waiting in the wings. Only 3 Palace Guard remaining, so they have been worn down over the long haul, and the Storm Guard are on the front line, so there is a unit that will put up a fight to the bitter, bitter end. The Trebuchet is trying to get into position to make itself useful, but that time has long since passed. But as long as every other aspect of your army is doing the business, you will be fine. Bros of the Shadow, also a decent unit in melee, but ultimately at this point, of course, they are finished at this level. Glory Seekers, 11 of them. Will it be an admit defeat, or will it be a chain rout that causes them to be finished off? Let's see here. Well, the Storm Guard are tanky boys, aren't they? Especially from the front. They don't even have a phalanx, it's worth saying as well. The Nurad Storm Guard, they're not a unit that has access to a phalanx. They're not the only ones that are like that. The Fountain Guard are quite similar to that and can ultimately do admit defeat. Unit just never say die attitude, to be sure, but in the end it was a close battle. It was one of those battles where I think constantly throughout it you always felt the defenders had the upper hand on it. But it was close, like one misplay from the defenders and they would have let the attackers right back in, so they deserve a lot of credit, I think, for the fact that they were able to actually withstand and constantly keep their shape, constantly keep their organisation. No mistakes they made, well, any mistakes they made were very, very minor, to be fair. I don't like to nitpick as much as often, it may seem like I do. But yeah, they ultimately did well, and I think the defenders were good value for their win here. Bad luck to the attackers. I think, again, it just comes down to unification of an assault on all sides. Instead of one going and then another and then another, if it's a bit disjointed like that, you always give the defenders a chance to organise well, and you can rapidly find yourself running out of manpower. And ultimately, that's what happened here. And it was a good attacking composition as well. It may not be law-friendly, but Lothlorien's inclusion does mean they had a wide breadth of strengths and weaknesses. Well, strengths, I would say. Not so much weaknesses. Regardless, let's have a little look and see what did the damage for Demon's Hunter. His Wards of Minas Ithil did very well. We saw them firing for quite a while. All of his ranged units were very good, which is often quite difficult to track individual units over a course of a battle. As far as his units that were holding the line, Nimlothians were only committed later. The Fountain Guard were actually dealt with really rather well by basic javelins and just overwhelming them. So not a battle for them, really. Citadel Guard, mixed fortunes, very mixed fortunes for the Axon of Lasarnak. One unit got absolutely butchered, I'd imagine, by crossbows. And yeah, the Trebuchet was a bit of a waste as well. So mainly the ranged units of Gondor were the main thing with them. Other than that, though, yeah, a couple of melee units did okay as well. But yeah, big thank you to Demon's Hunter for sending this battle to me. It's been a long while since we've seen this map. Apologies, I can just... One reason why I've been sort of like pausing in my speech is because I can hear it's like banging. I guess it must be the pipes again. It's the unfortunate nature of being right under the boiler. Hopefully the microphone doesn't pick that up, but it's a little bit antagonising. Anyway, irregardless of that, big thank you to Demon's Hunter for sending me a battle on a map that we haven't seen in quite some time. A very nice siege as well, almost Nor-friendly, as it were. And big thank you to all the players that took part in this battle. Like I said at the end of the last one, it's very probable that I've already released a channel update at this point, sort of explaining what the near future may very well hold for myself and what that means for the channel. Regardless, it has narrowed itself down to really one of two things that's going to happen, and really the only thing is when the changes come, more so than if at this point. The changes to the channel. One option would have it be fairly early into the new year, sort of February time, possibly March at a push. The other option would have it be into the summer. So obviously, from a channel point of view, I suppose most people would be hoping that it's the later of the two options to the summer, because it means I can keep up my current pace for a little bit longer. But irregardless, I'm sure that there's already been a video detailing that anyway, so I'll stop rambling about that. I've got a few more replays to do, hopefully by this point as well. What I will probably do as well is there probably will have been a test stream sort of around New Year's Eve, possibly New Year's Day, just to sort of test the waters on that, to see if the internet is in a fit state to start streaming again. Because I do obviously want to get into to doing that again, because it was a good part of my schedule, which is obviously for the time being, at the time of recording, derailed a little bit because of the local internet conditions. That was always a possibility, and I always knew that. So hopefully that will make a bit of a return as well, and we can finally actually start continuing with the Erebor campaign, which has left off in a precarious position. But yeah, hopefully that will have already sorted itself out as well. So basically I'm talking about things that should have already happened, but if not, they should be happening very, very soon. So I guess it's still relevant from that point of view. But yeah, once again, big thank you to Demons Hunter and all the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.